They say your body goes into shock to protect your mind from agony, but no medical textbook prepares you for waking up in a burn unit, swathed in sterile gauze, only to realize the man who destroyed your life is smiling on a golf course. My husband thought my coma was the perfect cover to steal my empire. He forgot one detail. I built everything from ashes, and I know exactly how to light a match. Hello to the wonderful audience of the Zoe Revenge Stories channel, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here with us today. Recently, YouTube has disabled our channel's monetization features, leaving us entirely without a budget to maintain our daily operations. If you find yourself captivated by today's story, we would be incredibly grateful if you could support us with just $1 so we can fairly pay our dedicated team to survive and keep creating the content you love. You can easily donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the PayPal link located in the description or the comments section below. My name is Clara Santos, and I was exactly 34 years old when my entire universe was violently reduced to the sharp, sterile scent of antiseptic and the relentless rhythmic beeping of heart monitors. I woke up confined to a specialized intensive care unit at a Boston burn center. My reality had become a continuous haze of agonizing, white-hot pain, the direct and devastating result of a catastrophic chemical explosion at the primary testing laboratory of Lumina Synthesis. Lumina was not just a company. It was the cutting-edge biotechnology firm I had built from absolutely nothing, pouring years of sweat and brilliance into its foundation. Now, my physical torment was absolute. Every single nerve ending in my body felt as though it was still actively submerged in that blinding chemical fire. The brilliant medical staff subjected me to a grueling, endless series of surgical skin grafts. It was procedure after procedure that relentlessly drained every single ounce of my physical strength, leaving me a hollow shell of the vibrant woman I once was. The physical agony was a living, breathing monster residing in the room with me. Yet, as the long, excruciating days bled seamlessly into one another, I realized something far more horrifying. The searing pain radiating from my charred, grafted skin was truly nothing compared to the bone-deep, terrifying chill creeping into my hospital room. That chill did not originate from the hospital's strict climate control systems. It emanated entirely and exclusively from my husband, Vance. His mandatory visits were brief, remarkably hollow, and utterly devoid of even a fraction of human warmth. He would stand awkwardly at the absolute farthest foot of my bed, his cold eyes darting anywhere and everywhere but at my heavily bandaged face. He treated me far less like the successful woman he once proudly vowed to cherish, and increasingly like a grotesque, highly irritating inconvenience blocking his daily schedule. The ultimate breaking point finally arrived on a bleak Tuesday afternoon, exactly 24 hours after my exhausted lead surgeon delivered the very first piece of genuinely magnificent news since the tragic accident. The medical team proudly informed me that I had miraculously survived the critical necrosis stage. Even better, they had successfully managed to save my entire left arm from permanent amputation. I felt a fragile, desperate, and beautiful spark of genuine hope ignite in my chest. I waited anxiously for Vance to arrive, craving the simple, reassuring comfort of his presence to share this one tiny, hard-won victory. When he finally pushed through the heavy double doors of the intensive care unit, he was absolutely not wearing the wrinkled, tired clothes of a worried, devoted spouse. Instead, he was impeccably dressed in pristine, ridiculously expensive winter sports attire. It was the exact kind of flashy designer gear meant exclusively for the pristine slopes of elite ski resorts. He did not bother to ask how I was feeling today. He did not gently reach out to touch my few unbandaged, trembling fingers. He simply stood there, his jaw tightly clenched in a mask of feigned exhaustion, repeatedly and impatiently glancing down at the heavy gold mechanical watch strapped securely to his wrist. He looked thoroughly, profoundly annoyed by the mere few minutes he was legally forced to spend in my painful presence. "I cannot do this right now, Clara," He sighed heavily, his smooth voice entirely devoid of a single ounce of empathy or concern. I am under entirely too much psychological pressure dealing with the massive financial fallout of your little lab accident. My mental health is rapidly deteriorating. I need a serious break from this depressing environment. I am taking a trip out to Aspen to play some golf and properly decompress with a few of my major corporate partners. Before my severely scorched vocal cords could even attempt to form a single, raspy syllable of protest, before I could swallow my pride and beg him to stay just for 5 more brief minutes, he turned sharply on his heel and walked straight out. The heavy, soundproof door clicked shut behind him, sealing me securely back inside my lonely, sterile prison. Midnight eventually arrived, bringing with it a vicious, blinding flare-up of phantom nerve pain that violently tore right through my heavily medicated, foggy haze. My broken body convulsed, trembling violently against the crisp, perfectly white hospital sheets, in a fleeting moment of pure, pathetic desperation, seeking just a tiny sliver of familiar human comfort in the dark. I managed to blindly reach for my bedside telephone with my good hand and shakily dialed his private number. He picked up the call on the 4th ring. There was absolutely no sleepy, deeply concerned greeting waiting for me. Instead, a massive, solid wall of deafening, pulsating electronic club music crashed violently against my sensitive ear, piercing over the heavy, rhythmic bass. I clearly and distinctly heard the unmistakable, delicate clinking of expensive crystal champagne flutes. Then, another sound cut through the chaotic background noise like a jagged knife. It was a woman. Her tone was saccharine, excessively whiny, and dripping with sickeningly flirtatious intimacy, loudly calling his name and playfully demanding his undivided attention. He ended the call immediately. The sudden dead silence on the disconnected line somehow felt 10 times louder than the very chemical explosion that had originally put me in this miserable hospital bed. In that precise, agonizing fraction of a second, something vital inside my chest completely snapped, but crucially, it did not shatter into grief. Instead of bursting into useless, hysterical tears or succumbing completely to the crushing, suffocating weight of his ultimate betrayal, a terrifying, absolute, and razor-sharp clarity washed entirely over me. The agonizing, relentless throbbing in my ruined, burned flesh rapidly faded into the distant background, completely eclipsed by a cold, fiercely calculating, and quiet rage. I gritted my teeth so hard my jaw ached, carefully and painfully pushing my battered body up against the stiff pillows. When the young night nurse finally walked in for her routine hourly rounds, I brilliantly forced a polite, slightly pained, and convincing smile onto my face. "Excuse me," I whispered softly, making sure to keep my voice perfectly, reassuringly steady. "I urgently need to process a secure wire transfer to cover some immediate out-of-network hospital expenses before the morning billing cycle begins. Would it be at all possible to borrow your administrative laptop for just 10 quick minutes?" She nodded sympathetically, completely oblivious to my true intentions, and kindly handed over the device. As soon as the bright screen illuminated my heavily bandaged face in the dark room, I immediately bypassed the secure hospital network entirely. My undamaged fingers hovered confidently over the keyboard, and with the lethal, unmatched precision of a founder who knows absolutely every hidden backdoor of her own digital creation, I silently and purposefully breached the highly classified internal administrative servers of Lumina Synthesis. The glowing screen of the borrowed laptop was the only source of light in my desolate hospital room, casting long, haunting shadows against the sterile white walls. I swiftly typed in my master administrator credentials, expecting the familiar, comforting blue dashboard of the Lumina Synthesis central server to greet me. Instead, a harsh, flashing crimson banner violently struck my eyes. The screen bluntly read, "Access denied. Administrator privileges permanently revoked." A heavy, suffocating weight dropped instantly into the pit of my stomach, making the nausea from my heavy painkillers surge dangerously. Nobody had the sheer authority to lock me out of my own creation. except for someone wielding full executive control over the board of directors. I ignored the stinging pain shooting up my bandaged shoulder and frantically typed in a secondary diagnostic command through the terminal window. The system immediately spat out a horrifying automated report. For the past 48 hours, there had been a relentless, aggressive string of massive data export requests. Someone was actively raiding the core patent repository. They were systematically ripping out the very heart of my life's work, downloading every single proprietary chemical formula, prototype schematic, and biological blueprint I had ever engineered. The sheer audacity of the theft triggered a massive adrenaline spike that completely overrode my physical agony. My husband clearly believed that changing the master passwords and throwing up a few heavy corporate firewalls would be enough to keep a bedridden woman blind and helpless. He severely underestimated the intense paranoia of a chief engineer. 7 years ago, long before Vance even knew how to spell the word biotechnology, I had meticulously woven a highly encrypted, invisible digital backdoor into the deepest foundational architecture of the main server. It was a ghost protocol, completely untraceable and immune to any standard corporate security sweep. My undamaged left hand flew across the sterile keyboard, inputting the long, complex string of prime numbers and raw code required to wake the sleeping protocol. The system did not even register a breach. The heavy security firewalls instantly melted away like fragile tissue paper, leaving the underlying architecture completely exposed to my commands. I bypassed the central mainframe entirely and tunneled directly into the highly secured, synchronized server hosting Vance's personal and executive email accounts. What I uncovered in those digital folders completely shattered whatever lingering illusion of reality I still held on to, replacing my heartbeat with a deafening drum of sheer panic. I ran a quick, silent geographical trace on the Internet Protocol address that was actively downloading my life's work. The location ping did not point anywhere near the snowy, elite ski slopes of Aspen. The signal was bouncing directly off a high-security luxury business suite in Geneva, Switzerland. He was entirely across the globe. My eyes darted to a heavily encrypted folder in his outbox labeled simply as Project Exodus. I cracked the basic encryption and opened the first portable document format file. It was a comprehensive medical power of attorney. I read through the dense legal jargon, my blood running colder with every single syllable. The document legally declared me entirely mentally and physically incapacitated. It granted Vance absolute, uncontested authority to liquidate, sell, or transfer 100% of my corporate shares and intellectual property. The notary stamp and the digital signatures were flawlessly executed. He had legally finalized this grotesque forgery during the exact 14 days I was kept submerged in a medically induced coma, fighting for my life on a ventilator. He had weaponized my unconsciousness to stage a flawless corporate coup. I frantically opened the next attachment, a massive term sheet that made the breath catch violently in my throat. I stared at the imposing logo of the purchasing entity, feeling a fresh, violent wave of blinding nausea wash over me. Omnicorp Innovations. They were not just a competitor. They were a ruthless, predatory global conglomerate known for acquiring brilliant startups, gutting their vital resources, firing the visionary staff, and burying the technology forever to maintain their ironclad market monopoly. I had publicly sworn on multiple industry stages that I would rather burn Lumina Synthesis to the absolute ground than ever let those corporate vultures touch a single drop of my research. Yet, here was the irrefutable proof staring me in the face. Vance was handing them my entire empire on a silver platter. I dug much deeper into the long email threads between Vance and the lead acquisition directors at Omnicorp. I found a scanned receipt from an international wire transfer that had been cleared and authenticated just 48 hours ago. It was a massive, non-refundable deposit for the exclusive acquisition rights. $40 million. I traced the routing numbers attached to the receipt, hacking seamlessly into the public registry of the receiving offshore bank. The $40 million had been funneled directly into an irrevocable, blind trust fund securely registered in the Cayman Islands. The trust was not solely in his name. It was registered jointly under Vance and a woman named Elena Rostova, It was undeniably the woman from the midnight phone call. But the horror did not stop there. Attached to the financial registry was a paid invoice from an exclusive ultra-private maternity clinic in Zurich. The itemized invoice clearly detailed premium prenatal care and an upcoming scheduled delivery. She was 6 months pregnant with his child, while I was tirelessly working 90-hour weeks to build our future, and while I was literally burning alive in my own laboratory, he had been busy building a secret, parallel life financed entirely by my genius. The final, fatal blow lay at the very bottom of the primary email thread with the Omnicorp executives. It was a highlighted, aggressively bolded calendar invite locking in the final contract execution date, next Friday at 9 o'clock in the morning, exactly 7 days from today. It was a perfectly, ruthlessly calculated timeline. My lead surgeon had officially documented that I would be strictly confined to this sterile isolation ward for at least another 10 days before I could even attempt to stand up. Vance planned to sign the final transfer deeds in Geneva, collect the remaining massive balance of the buyout, and vanish into the international ether with his pregnant mistress and my stolen fortune, leaving me entirely bankrupt, physically broken, and completely alone in a hospital bed. I did not scream. I did not throw the borrowed laptop across the sterile room or demand an immediate explanation from the empty shadows. Emotion is an expensive luxury reserved strictly for the victorious, and right now, I was a casualty bleeding out on the corporate battlefield. I carefully disconnected from his server, methodically erasing every single digital footprint I had made, ensuring my ghost protocol went back to sleep. Picking up my personal cell phone with trembling, bandaged fingers, I opened my message thread with him. My text was brief, pleasantly naive, and utterly terrifying in its absolute restraint. Have a wonderful time golfing. The doctor says my recovery is progressing perfectly. I hit the send button. Let him believe his own flawless illusion. Let him operate under the arrogant assumption that his helpless pawn was still blindly sitting exactly where he left her on the board. The heavy scheduled doses of intravenous pain medication continuously threatened to pull my consciousness back into a dark, suffocating fog. I violently pinched the small patch of unburned skin on my thigh, using the sharp, grounding sting to fight off the rolling waves of chemically induced nausea. I needed absolute, unquestioning loyalty right now, and in the cutthroat biotechnology world, genuine loyalty is significantly rarer than platinum. I opened a deeply hidden, heavily encrypted messaging application on my phone and typed a complex sequence of code to a very specific private contact. Marcus. He was a notorious former white hat hacker who had foolishly tried to breach the Lumina Synthesis mainframe exactly 5 years ago. Instead of handing him over to the federal authorities to rot in a maximum security prison, I offered him a highly lucrative position as my director of cybersecurity. He was undeniably brilliant, fiercely protective of our network, and completely capable of operating totally off the grid. At exactly 2 o'clock in the morning, the heavy hospital door silently cracked open. A tall man dressed flawlessly in a standard hospital custodial uniform stepped quietly into the dim fluorescent light. He confidently pushed a heavy-duty industrial cleaning cart into the room. But underneath the neat stack of fresh white linens and heavy sanitizing supplies lay a customized, military-grade tactical laptop and a dense, untraceable cellular router. Marcus did not say a single word about my grotesque, heavily bandaged appearance. His sharp eyes were completely cold and focused entirely on the impossible mission ahead. He quickly established a localized, invisible network bubble inside my small room, effectively blinding the hospital's internal surveillance cameras and aggressively routing our internet connection through 36 randomly generated international proxy servers. "They locked you out completely," Marcus whispered, his fingers flying across his illuminated mechanical keyboard to create a secure, encrypted bridge for my device. "The board thinks you are totally incapacitated." I nodded slowly, leaning my aching head back against the stiff pillows. My mind was rapidly and ruthlessly calculating the grim legal variables of my current situation. A conventional corporate counterattack was completely out of the question. Vance had executed the forged medical power of attorney flawlessly, utilizing top-tier international lawyers. If I alerted my own corporate legal counsel and attempted to file a standard federal injunction to halt the impending sale, the ensuing legal battle would easily drag on for 3 to 5 agonizing years. During that extensive time frame, the Omnicorp legal team would aggressively drain Lumina Synthesis dry, tying up every single financial asset in endless litigation until my beautiful company was nothing but a bankrupt, empty husk. I absolutely could not afford to fight them in a public courtroom. I had to completely annihilate them on my own digital territory. I do not need to block the international transaction, I told Marcus, my voice barely more than a raspy, damaged whisper against the quiet, steady hum of his portable server equipment. I am going to let him sell it. I am going to politely let Omnicorp pay the full $40 million. Give me direct, unfiltered access to the core product source code. Marcus expertly bypassed the heavily fortified, expensive external firewalls that Vance had arrogantly erected, creating a microscopic, entirely silent digital tunnel straight into the beating heart of the Lumina mainframe. I did not attempt to alter the stolen financial data. I did not try to delete the massive patent files. Instead, I carefully reached deep into the very foundational architecture of the biological algorithms I had spent my entire adult life writing. I meticulously authored a new, highly aggressive digital time bomb and embedded it directly into the foundational genetic sequencing software. It disguised itself perfectly as a standard, routine system update. In reality, it was a catastrophic fail-safe protocol so deeply and intricately integrated that attempting to remove it would instantly and violently shatter the entire program. The parameters I coded were brutally simple and mathematically flawless. From the exact moment the final corporate transfer contract was legally signed, the entire Lumina Synthesis operating system would begin a silent, totally irreversible countdown. The core code demanded one specific, unforgeable key to stabilize the environment: my direct, live biometric authentication. If my unique retinal scan and right thumbprint were not physically registered into the master console within exactly 7 days, the protocol would initiate a total cryptographic lockdown. Every single chemical formula, every brilliant schematic, and every gigabyte of proprietary data would be permanently scrambled into an unbreakable, chaotic string of completely useless code. Vance was so incredibly desperate to sell my life's work. He had absolutely no idea he was enthusiastically preparing to hand the ruthless Omnicorp executives a massive box of digital scrap metal. The lethal trap was now perfectly set in the shadows. All I had to do was patiently wait for the arrogant rat to blindly take the bait. Exactly 96 hours after he boarded his international flight, Vance finally graced my hospital room with his overwhelming presence. He strolled through the heavy medical doors looking less like a devastated husband and significantly more like a man who had just won a massive international lottery. His skin boasted a fresh, expensive alpine tan that aggressively mocked my pale, heavily bandaged complexion. He was wearing a custom-tailored navy suit that practically screamed wealth, yet, in a display of almost comical cheapness, he was clutching a tiny, pathetic bouquet of heavily wilted carnations clearly purchased from the brightly lit hospital gift shop downstairs. My God, Clara, it is so incredibly difficult seeing you like this. He sighed dramatically, gently placing the sad flowers on the sterile metal tray next to my bed. His voice dripped with thick, manufactured sympathy, but his dark eyes were bright, dancing with a barely contained, manic electrical energy. The trip to Aspen was an absolute nightmare. I spent the entire 48 hours just pacing the floor, worrying myself sick about your recovery. I could barely even hold a golf club. I let my heavy eyelids flutter, intentionally playing the role of the heavily medicated, entirely defeated victim he so desperately needed me to be. I am just so tired. Vance, everything hurts constantly. He leaned in close, the overwhelming scent of his expensive designer cologne clashing violently with the sharp, clinical smell of antiseptic and burnt flesh. I know, sweetheart, I know. That is exactly why I took the liberty of handling all the chaotic administrative nightmares at Lumina Synthesis while you were sleeping. You do not need to worry your beautiful head about a single corporate decision. I have legally streamlined our entire executive operation so you can focus strictly on healing. I am taking care of absolutely everything for us. He reached smoothly into the breast pocket of his expensive suit jacket and produced a sleek silver fountain pen alongside a small, neatly folded stack of standard hospital administrative papers. His movements were overly casual, completely rehearsed. The hospital billing department is being unbelievably aggressive about your experimental skin graft treatments, he muttered, adopting an entirely fake tone of mild annoyance. They are refusing to release the next batch of specialized antibiotics until we physically sign off on this updated liability waiver and the out-of-network insurance release form. Just standard, boring bureaucratic nonsense. He slid the paperwork onto the rolling tray, carefully pulling back the top two legitimately printed hospital forms to expose merely the very bottom edge of the third page. It was precisely aligned, so only the designated signature line and the crisp date were visible. To any heavily drugged patient, it looked exactly like a standard medical consent form, but my violently sharp, unclouded mind recognized the heavy, distinctively textured, watermarked legal paper instantly. It was the final, binding signature page of the Omnicorp asset transfer contract. He needed my fresh, physical signature to officially release the escrow funds and make the massive $40 million wire transfer completely irreversible. I allowed my left hand to tremble violently as I slowly reached for the silver pen. I forced a weak, pathetic cough, making sure to look directly up at his face. The sheer, unadulterated greed radiating from his tense jawline was almost blinding. "Thank you for handling all this," I whispered softly, letting my voice crack perfectly. I pressed the nib of the pen against the thick legal paper, intentionally dragging the ink to produce a shaky, incredibly fragile version of my usual confident signature. The second the final loop of my name was complete, Vance swiftly snatched the paperwork back, neatly folding it and burying it deep inside his suit jacket with the lightning speed of a seasoned street magician. "Rest now, darling," he murmured quickly, taking a massive step backward toward the exit. "I have to rush these documents back to the billing administration before the 5 o'clock deadline. I will be back tomorrow." He did not even wait for my response. The heavy door clicked shut, and his rapid, triumphant footsteps echoed down the silent hallway. The very second the rhythmic sound of his expensive leather shoes faded away completely, the suffocating atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Marcus stepped out from the deep shadows of the adjoining private bathroom, his tactical laptop already glowing brightly in his hands. "He took the bait entirely," Marcus stated flatly, his fingers flying across the quiet keyboard. "The encrypted tracking tag I slipped into his phone confirms he is heading straight for the Central Financial District. He is officially locking in the signature." "Perfect," I replied, throwing off the weak, trembling facade like a heavy winter coat. My voice was suddenly sharp, clear, and totally devoid of mercy. "Initiate the primary secure link to the federal authorities, but do not call the local branch. Patch me directly through to the highest-ranking director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation Economic Crimes Division." Marcus raised a single eyebrow but complied without a fraction of hesitation. "You are reporting the corporate theft now." "Absolutely not," I said coldly, watching the secure connection bars illuminate on his screen. "If I report that Vance stole my company, it becomes a messy domestic dispute over marital assets. The federal agents will not move fast enough to freeze the offshore accounts. No, Marcus, we are not reporting a crime against me. We are officially reporting a massive, orchestrated, international wire fraud committed directly against a multinational conglomerate." I directed Marcus to establish a heavily encrypted, untraceable audio connection to a highly guarded, deeply private cellular number. It was the direct, emergency executive line of Richard Sterling, the notoriously ruthless, ice-cold chief executive officer of Omnicorp Innovations. Sterling was an absolute corporate apex predator, a man who regularly destroyed entire legacy companies simply because they mildly inconvenienced his quarterly profit margins. He was definitely not a man who tolerated being played for a fool. The line rang exactly twice before a deep, fiercely annoyed voice barked into my ear. "This private channel is heavily restricted. State your access clearance or I will have this frequency traced and prosecuted." "Good afternoon, Mr. Sterling," I said, my tone perfectly even and dangerously calm. "My name is Clara Santos. I am the founder, the chief engineer, and the absolute sole owner of Lumina Synthesis, and I am calling to inform you that you are currently in the active process of throwing away $40 million on a completely worthless, dead piece of technology." There was a sharp, absolute silence on the other end of the line. When Sterling finally spoke, the underlying threat in his voice could have frozen an entire ocean. "Your husband just provided us with legally binding, fully authenticated medical documentation proving you are entirely incapacitated and legally unfit to govern your own corporate assets. We own your intellectual property now." "My husband is a phenomenal liar," I shot back smoothly, never losing my absolute composure. "He used perfectly forged medical powers of attorney while I was temporarily comatose to illegally authorize this sale. But that is merely my personal domestic problem. Your massive corporate problem is that the entire Lumina genetic sequencing source code you just purchased is completely locked behind an aggressive biometric failsafe. It demands my living, physical retinal scan, and my unique thumbprint every 7 days. Or the entire architecture permanently encrypts itself into useless digital garbage. Vance cannot give you the activation keys because Vance does not even know they exist." I heard the faint, sharp sound of Sterling deeply inhaling a breath. I had him trapped perfectly in my snare. "I have just sent a highly secure, encrypted data packet directly to your private terminal," I continued relentlessly, pushing my massive advantage. "Inside, you will find irrefutable, digital proof of my husband's forged medical documents. More importantly, you will find the complete routing logs for the massive $40 million cash deposit you transferred to him 48 hours ago. It did not go into a corporate escrow account. He funneled your entire investment straight into a blind, offshore personal trust fund registered in the Cayman Islands under his name and the name of his pregnant mistress. If this is a desperate bluff, Miss Santos, I will personally see to it that you never work in the biotechnology sector again," Sterling snarled, the raw fury practically vibrating through the cellular speaker. "It is absolutely no bluff," I stated coldly. "My director of cybersecurity has already formally forwarded this exact same evidence packet to the Federal Bureau of Investigation Economic Crimes Division. Vance is actively finalizing the transfer paperwork right now. He plans to flee the country completely by Friday morning with your corporate money. I am not asking you to return my company out of the goodness of your heart. I am telling you that you have been heavily scammed by a pathetic amateur. What you decide to do with the man who just tried to steal $40 million directly from Omnicorp is entirely your business." I did not wait for his terrifying response. I reached over and forcefully severed the secure connection. I leaned back against the harsh hospital pillows, feeling a deep, profoundly dark sense of satisfaction wash over my painful, healing body. I did not need to scream, or cry, or confront my treacherous husband face to face. I had simply stepped back into the shadows and elegantly unleashed a bloodthirsty corporate monster to do my absolute worst bidding. I had masterfully turned the very people Vance thought he was partnering with into his ultimate executioners. The apex predator was officially off the leash, and Vance had just been painted with a massive, glowing target right on his back. Friday morning arrived with a brilliant, crisp sunrise, entirely ignorant of the absolute devastation about to unfold. At precisely 9 o'clock, Vance was sitting comfortably inside the heavily fortified, soundproof VIP transaction suite of the most exclusive central bank in the city. He was casually sipping a perfectly brewed double espresso, sinking deeply into a plush leather armchair that practically swallowed his custom suit. He confidently drummed his manicured fingers against the polished mahogany table. Watching the senior branch manager carefully type in the final, complex authorization sequences, This was the absolute climax of his grand, treacherous scheme. The final international wire transfer was merely seconds away from clearing. Ready to blast the remaining escrow funds directly into his hidden offshore accounts. He was already vividly imagining the crisp mountain air of Switzerland and the luxurious, consequence-free life he was about to step into. The bank manager confidently hit the enter key. A heavy, tense silence filled the luxurious room. Vance smiled brightly, ready to stand up and shake the man's hand. But the expected soft chime of a successful transaction never came. Instead, the massive, high-definition monitor mounted on the wall suddenly flared with a harsh, violent crimson light. A massive warning banner completely overtook the screen, flashing a terrifying message in bold, block letters: account permanently frozen under direct federal jurisdiction. Severe international fraud alert. Vance blinked, a sudden, icy knot forming tightly in his throat. There must be some sort of ridiculous technical glitch, he stammered, frantically leaning over the heavy mahogany table. Refresh the secure server immediately. That is my private corporate money. Before the terrified bank manager could even touch his keyboard again, the heavy reinforced oak doors of the VIP suite were violently kicked completely off their metal hinges. Absolute, deafening chaos erupted into the quiet, luxurious space. Over 24 heavily armed federal agents, completely clad in dark tactical gear, swarmed the room like a swarm of angry hornets. They aggressively shoved the terrified bank manager against the wall, their weapons drawn and strictly focused on my husband. "Do not move a single muscle," the lead federal agent roared, aggressively grabbing Vance by the lapels of his expensive designer suit and forcefully throwing him face first onto the polished mahogany table. "You are under official arrest for massive international wire fraud, aggravated corporate espionage, and the illegal forgery of federal medical documents." Vance gasped for air as the cold, unforgiving steel of heavy handcuffs clicked brutally tightly around his wrists. His perfectly styled hair was instantly ruined, pressed painfully against the hard wood. He twisted his neck, his eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated terror, only to see three incredibly intimidating men in impeccably tailored dark suits step calmly through the shattered doorway. They were the elite, ruthless senior legal counsel for Omnicorp Innovations. The lead corporate lawyer sneered down at Vance like he was looking at a disgusting insect. He violently threw a massive, heavy binder of legal documents directly onto the table, right next to Vance's terrified face. "You made a highly catastrophic mistake thinking you could scam Richard Sterling," the lawyer hissed coldly. "That is an official civil lawsuit for malicious fraud and the deliberate theft of corporate assets. Omnicorp is legally seeking exactly $100 million in immediate punitive damages. We are going to completely liquidate every single asset you have ever touched, freeze every penny you have ever hidden, and ensure you spend the rest of your miserable life rotting in a maximum security federal cell." The federal agents violently hauled Vance up from the table. His entire body was shaking uncontrollably, his previously arrogant facade completely shattering into a million pathetic pieces. In a frantic, blind moment of pure desperation as they dragged him toward the hallway, he wildly begged the lead agent for his cellular phone to call his legal counsel. The agent mockingly pulled the device from Vance's pocket, dialed the phone on speaker, and held it up to his ear. But Vance did not call a lawyer. He desperately screamed for them to call the Swiss number. The line connected. "Elena," Vance sobbed hysterically into the speaker, completely ignoring the dozens of people watching his pathetic breakdown. "The federal agents are here. Omnicorp knows everything. You need to immediately secure the blind trust and call the international lawyers." A harsh, incredibly cold laugh echoed from the small speaker. "Are you completely insane?" Elena replied, her voice entirely stripped of the sickeningly sweet affection she had used just days ago. "The federal authorities just froze the offshore accounts 10 minutes ago. My private banker tipped me off. You are completely ruined. Luckily for me, I just emptied the physical private wall safe in the Geneva suite. There was barely enough cash left to cover my immediate relocation expenses. But it will have to do. Do not ever try to contact me again. I am taking the baby and disappearing. Have a wonderful time in federal prison." The line went completely dead. Vance let out a guttural, agonizing scream of pure defeat as the agents aggressively shoved him out of the bank and into the back of a heavily armored federal transport vehicle. Exactly 4 hours later, the chaotic noise of the raid had completely faded, replaced by the sterile, echoing silence of a freezing, concrete federal holding cell. Stripped of his expensive suit, dressed in a humiliating, bright orange jumpsuit, Vance was finally granted his one legally mandated phone call. Completely abandoned by his mistress, terrified of the Omnicorp lawyers, and facing decades of hard federal time, his broken, panicked mind desperately crawled back to the only person who had ever truly protected him. Back in my quiet hospital room, the bedside telephone suddenly rang. The sound was sharp, but I did not flinch. I slowly reached out with my undamaged left hand and calmly lifted the receiver. "Clara," Vance wailed the absolute second the line connected. He was hysterically hyperventilating, crying so hard he was barely forming coherent words. "Clara, please, you have to save me. It is a massive misunderstanding. The federal agents have me locked in a cell. Omnicorp is trying to completely destroy me. You have to call the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation right now. Please, Clara, just tell them you legally authorized the sale. Tell them you gave me the medical permission. If you do not, they are going to lock me away for 25 years. I am begging you on my knees. Clara." I sat perfectly still against my pillows. I listened closely to the pathetic, desperate sound of his absolute destruction. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I did not feel any residual anger. I only felt a cold, brilliant, and deeply satisfying peace. I brought the heavy plastic receiver closer to my lips. My voice was incredibly steady, completely smooth, and colder than the concrete floor of his jail cell. "You were absolutely right," I whispered precisely, making sure he heard every single crisp syllable. "Going away to play golf is an excellent way to relieve severe psychological pressure. As for me, I strongly prefer playing chess, and you have just been completely checkmated." I did not wait to hear his frantic response. I firmly grabbed the thick cord connecting the telephone to the wall and forcefully yanked it entirely out of the plastic socket. The heavy receiver went completely dead in my hand. I gently placed it back onto the nightstand, picked up my glass of cold water, and took a long, refreshing sip, thoroughly enjoying the beautiful, unbroken silence of my hospital room. Exactly 3 months later, I confidently walked through the heavy glass doors of the Boston Burn Center. Stepping out into the brilliant, unclouded afternoon sunlight, I was no longer the broken, agonizingly helpless victim confined to a sterile bed. My severe burns had healed into powerful, textured scars, elegantly concealed beneath the flawless, sharp lines of a custom-tailored emerald silk blazer. My left arm, though occasionally carrying a faint, lingering stiffness from the extensive grafting surgeries, was entirely and fully recovered, moving with absolute, uncompromising strength. The federal justice system had moved with terrifying, breathtaking speed. My former husband, Vance, was brutally and efficiently crushed under the massive, combined weight of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the bottomless legal resources of Omnicorp Innovations. He was officially sentenced to 25 years without the possibility of parole in a maximum security federal penitentiary. He lost absolutely everything. His reputation was reduced to ashes. His personal assets were entirely liquidated to partially satisfy a colossal $100 million civil judgment, and his pregnant mistress had vanished into the deep European underground without leaving a single trace or uttering a single goodbye. However, the ultimate crowning victory was not merely destroying Vance. It was subjugating the massive corporate beast that thought it could feast on my life's work. Omnicorp had already foolishly sunk $40 million into the void, and their global supply chain was currently facing a catastrophic, imminent collapse without my proprietary genetic algorithms. They were entirely desperate, backed completely into a corner of their own arrogant making. This absolute desperation forced the notoriously ruthless Richard Sterling to humbly travel down from his glass tower and sit directly across from me at the heavy oak table in my private negotiation suite. When Sterling finally offered a completely legitimate, ironclad buyout contract, practically begging me to formally hand over the encryption keys to save his failing empire, I looked him dead in the eyes and smiled coldly. "I am absolutely not selling luminosynthesis to you, Mr. Sterling," I stated, my voice echoing with pure, unshakable authority. "You will never own my company. However, because I am a reasonable businesswoman, I am willing to grant Omnicorp a highly restricted, heavily monitored licensing agreement to utilize my foundational technology. The annual licensing fee will be exactly 3 times your original estimated valuation. Furthermore, your massive conglomerate will officially serve as the unconditional silent financial sponsor for all future Lumina research and development divisions." Sterling's face turned a brilliant shade of crimson. Completely trapped by his own massive corporate vulnerability, he had absolutely no choice. He furiously signed the extensive, deeply humiliating contract, legally binding Omnicorp to fund my brilliant empire indefinitely. The story truly ends exactly where it began, but under entirely different circumstances. I stood quietly in the center of my magnificent, completely reconstructed primary testing laboratory, the sharp, clean scent of fresh ozone and newly unboxed. State-of-the-art diagnostic equipment filled the expansive room. I slowly raised my left hand, letting the faint, jagged scars along my wrist catch the bright overhead light. I pressed my thumb firmly against the master biometric security panel. The entire digital architecture instantly recognized its true creator. The massive server racks hummed to life, bathing the dark room in a beautiful, pulsating blue glow. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, gazing out over the sprawling, vibrant city that was actively being illuminated and powered by the very biotechnology I had fought so fiercely to protect. Over in the far corner of the laboratory, a small television screen was silently broadcasting the evening news network. The prominent headline flashing across the bottom of the screen displayed breaking coverage of Vance officially arriving at the heavily fortified gates of the federal prison. His head bowed in absolute defeat. I had built my glorious empire entirely from the ashes, and the view from the absolute top was absolutely breathtaking. Thank you so incredibly much for taking the time to carefully listen to my story today. I would absolutely love to know where all of you wonderful listeners are tuning in from, so please let me know down in the comments section. If you truly enjoyed today's journey of justice and empowerment, please kindly consider supporting our amazing team with just $1. You can easily do this by scanning the PayPal quick response code currently on your screen, or by clicking the direct PayPal link provided in the video description or the pinned comment. Your highly generous contribution directly pays the salaries of our hardworking staff, helping them support their beautiful families and allowing this channel to continue creating the high-quality revenge stories you love. Have a wonderful day.